My hopes were high, and my expectations were low. But to be honest, despite having a somewhat positive experience, I'm still disappointed, because Steins Gate Reboot could have been so much more. It's still Steins Gate at the end of the day, but Reboot is wasted potential. We at Kirikiri Basra had the opportunity to play and review Steins Gate Reboot prior to its official release, and each of us on the team had fairly different opinions. Some were positive, and others less so. You can check out our aggregate review over on kirikiribasra.com or on the KKB YouTube channel. Now, Steins Gate Reboot is yet another remake visual novel for speculative science ADV Steins Gate, the second mainline entry in the science adventure franchise storyline. There's a ton of people out there who yell out to the world that Steins Gate is a masterpiece and that they wish they could go through it for the first time all over again. To capitalize on this common sentiment among fans, Mages has told the story of Steins Gate over and over and over again across so many different mediums. Reboot is their latest attempt at doing so. But is it any good? It certainly offers some aspects worthy of consideration, like its new content, and it provides a more accessible version of Steins Gate available on modern platforms, but I struggle to justify paying a whole $60 for mostly the same exact game. Let's talk about this all in greater detail. I'll first give an overview of the game itself, and then divide this review into two sections, what I liked and what I didn't. I tried keeping this video as spoiler-free as I could. Starting off with information about the game itself, Steins Gate Reboot tells the story of Okabe Rintaro, or self-proclaimed mad scientist Hoin Kyoma, as he accidentally uncovers a means of sending text messages back to the past through a phone-operated microwave. As he and the rest of his friends at the Future Gadget Laboratory continue to experiment with time travel, he finds himself involved in a conspiracy centered around the particle physics research organization, CERN. But before he knows it, he's gone too far and too deep with his experiments. It's a time travel classic, heavily inspired by so many other stories, like James P. Hogan's Thrice Upon a Time, and Hollywood films like Back to the Future and Groundhog Day. It may not be the most original of stories, but it's a beloved classic for a reason. As I alluded to earlier, Steins Gate is very notably the second part of the SciDV storyline, and not exactly a fully standalone story. The SciDV series is a long-running sci-fi multimedia franchise, somewhat similar to the likes of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Each part has its own unique cast, settings, central sci-fi topic, and somewhat self-contained plot, but they all build upon one another to construct a larger overarching narrative, currently comprising 6 mainline entries. If you can help it, I don't think it's worth going through part 2 before part 1. Therefore, I would strongly recommend playing Chaos Ed Noah before Steins Gate Reboot, just as I would with the original Steins Gate. You do have a little bit of a different understanding as to what Reboot itself is if you've gone through the rest of the series, but you'll also eventually understand that retroactively too. That being said, if you have not caught up with the series, you probably shouldn't watch the post-credit scene past the true ending, and I'll have a separate video talking about its implications. Technically speaking though, Steins Gate Reboot has no real prerequisites. If for whatever reason you're only interested in Steins Gate and not in the wider narrative, and you don't particularly care too much about completely understanding Steins Gate in its entirety, you can definitely play Reboot as a newcomer to the series too. Even the original game, due to only being the second entry in the series, isn't nearly as reliant on the context of other games as the later entries in the series are. So you'll definitely still understand enough to enjoy it standalone, but you will absolutely see many more layers to the story if you have more context. One of the roots of Chaos Ed Noah has a series of twists that set up the rest of the series. Having that context in particular is quite critical. Now, what is new in Reboot specifically, and how does it differ from the prior versions of Steins Gate? For the most part, it is the same general story of Steins Gate that people know. However, it is largely based off of the heavily truncated script of Steins Gate Elite, the previous remake of Steins Gate with fully animated visuals. Elite notably took the original game's text as a base, but used visuals from the Steins Gate anime adaptation, which despite being mostly faithful to the source, made a decent number of cuts and changes to the narrative. And to begin with, the anime only covered the true route, so they had to freshly animate a good amount of material from scratch, but due to budgetary constraints, there was only so much that they could newly animate in the first place. In the end, Mages just did not have animation corresponding to a fairly significant chunk of the Steins Gate visual novel. So ultimately, Elite yielded a script with 36% of the original's lines cut. Some of these cuts were admittedly due to animated material making descriptive narration redundant. However, basic descriptive text only accounted for a small percentage of Elite's cuts overall. A pretty significant amount of what it cut had important exposition, characterization, world building, mechanic explanations, and material with ties to the wider series. So it had a shorter, better paced version of the narrative that was achieved at a steep cost of narrative detail. Reboot, despite not having the constraint of animation and having much more standard visual novel presentation, still uses Elite's abridged script as a base. While Reboot does restore a fair bit of the cut visual descriptive text, the vast majority of what was cut in Elite remains cut in Reboot. And it's not like an entire third of the original Steins Gate was useless fluff. There were lots of important details within that text. Now, Reboot notably adds new content never seen before in any other version of the game. The biggest of these additions is a heroine route for the character Moeka. In the original Steins Gate and in Steins Gate Elite, each of the predominant heroines have a dedicated route. But the one notable exception was Moeka. Reboot rectifies that, giving her a route as well. It is loosely based off of Drama CD Gamma, Height of the Dark Dimension, but for the most part, it is a mostly original story that you can experience for the first time irrespective of whether or not you've listened to Hyde beforehand. Aside from the Moeka route, Reboot also adds in a few small scenes throughout the rest of the game. Notably, if you've done the previous True Ending flags, there's an additional scene added in the middle of Chapter 5, which you might find a little amusing if you've played Steins Gate 0 beforehand. Meanwhile, the Suza and Ferris routes each have one new scene serving to make their romances with Okabe a little bit more compelling, and the final act of the Luca route is considerably revised to similar effect. Lastly, for longtime Sides Adventure fans, there is a short but rather critical post-credit scene past the true ending with relevance to the wider series. If you have not caught up with the series, however, for spoiler reasons, I do not recommend you watch this post-credit scene. With that out the way though, I want to go over what exactly I liked and what I didn't. Starting off with what I liked, the base story. Steins Gate Reboot is still Steins Gate at the end of the day, and if you like the story of the original, chances are you'll still like the story of Reboot as well. Most of what I like about the original game remains intact in Reboot. You have a fascinating world of fascinating mechanics, you have an intricately built narrative, you have a great protagonist in Okabe, you have a strong emotional core behind the game, and you have a pretty decent and gripping story overall. As for what I liked about Reboot specifically, first up, the visuals, mostly. The original game's presentation was very simple, effective but nonetheless simple. Excluding the scenario, 85% of the original Steins Gate's development was done in the span of just 4 months. Compared to the original, they put a lot more work, time, and effort into Reboot's visuals. The backgrounds are super detailed and very intricately crafted, and they added a significant number of new CGs that simply did not exist in the original, which helps improve immersion. And while they do take some getting used to, most of the live 2D emote sprites look pretty nice in motion. I do have some qualms about certain aspects with the presentation that I'll discuss later, but for the most part, I think the visuals are fine. They definitely make for a much more modernized version of Steins Gate. The chromatic aberrations, glitching effects, and game of life-like imagery seen throughout the game are also very intentional. Aside from the detailed visuals, I also do like the pacing and length. I just generally prefer shorter games to longer ones, and Steins Gate Reboot is just a little over 20 hours long, just a little bit longer than Anonymous Code on auto speed. So like Steins Gate Elite, Reboot is a much better paced version of the narrative. In some ways, this makes the story feel more engaging, since the plot progresses much quicker and much more smoothly. But as I mentioned earlier in my overview of the game, it does unfortunately come with a steep cost of detail. Beyond that, I really liked some of the narrative additions in Reboot. While the Moeka route itself isn't anything special, the scene to branch onto it is genuinely horrifying. I was at the edge of my seat reading it. It was truly a fantastic addition to the game. Aside from this, there's also a few cool additions to the last chapter of the game, which help clarify how the true ending works since it's a common point of confusion for people. It becomes a little bit more in line with annularly chained Ouroboros. There are also new features like the Observer function, which allow you to see the entire chronology of the game across all the different world lines. It could have been more, but it's pretty neat to look at, especially with full series context. And of course, I really liked the post-credits scene. It's absolutely insane and wasn't what I expected at all. Even with the omission of the iconic Skyclad Observer insert in the game's final chapter, the new voiceover and re-recorded soundtrack are mostly fine too. But that's where all the positive things I have to say about the game come to an end. There's unfortunately a lot to Reboot that I just didn't really like either. Some of it, of course, is the same stuff that I don't like about the original. For instance, I firmly believe Steins Gate is the weakest side EV entry thematically, and revisiting the game through Reboot made me feel even more strongly about that sentiment. It's still a good story, but it misses the thought-provoking social commentary and profound messaging that the other games in the series have, which is what I'm mainly looking for out of a fictional work. What grievances I had with the characters and the cast in the original, I also still have in the Reboot version of the story too. With the exception of a few standout characters, I don't really love most of the cast from the main story alone. Important characterizations for characters like Luca are also relegated to optional text, and the game itself is designed too much like a traditional Galgame for my liking, in structure and in characterization. You have one male protagonist and then a bunch of different girls who all just happen to develop feelings for him. You have a fair number of fan service and sexual assault scenes, which also really take me out of the experience. And in classic Galgame fashion, you romance each of those girls across the different endings. Do the roots do anything to contribute to the story? Barely anything. You just give up and romance a different girl in these what-if scenarios. It's not at all like the Chaos games, where the roots are critical to the overall story. And the true ending flag system? I still hate that too. It's super unintuitive and actively sucks the fun out of the experience playing the game. Reboot doesn't really fix any of that. If anything, it makes it even harder by virtue of no longer having any on-screen indicators when you need to send a D-mail and making it far less obvious when you receive texts. Miss a text needed to get the true ending? Gotta go back and monotonously skip through the game. It really sucks the fun out of it. And it feels even worse after having finally gotten a side EV game that had very intuitive branching in anonymous code. But for the most part, those were grievances I had with the original or Elite. So what does Reboot specifically do that I don't like? Quite a lot. First up is ironically one of the points I praise it for: certain aspects of the new art. Don't get me wrong, the new backgrounds are super detailed, most of the emote sprites look good in motion, and having this many more CGs does improve immersion quite a lot. But while they clearly put a lot of effort into Reboot's new art, I feel like the art doesn't always capture the feel and tone of the original. What we have in Reboot is a much more moe feel to the game that would probably appeal to a wider, more casual audience. But it's because of this more moe artwork that I find that the game doesn't grip you the way it's supposed to, both in its lighter and darker scenes. Like when you first meet Kurisu, her eyes don't make her look like she's blaspheming God and staring daggers into your soul. She just looks like a cute moe blob. In sadder scenes like the ending of the Luca route, at least for me, the new CG and the new art style just doesn't make me feel anything. It feels so much more emotionless in such a moe art style. And for the darker scenes like in Suzuha's route, the new artwork and presentation just don't do it justice. I think they really needed to add back in NVL-like presentation, because ADV text with just a red background in those dark scenes just doesn't hit the same. Would I go so far as to say it's entirely a visual downgrade from the original? No, definitely not, but I found its presentation to often be lacking in areas that I think matter, and it's definitely a significant visual downgrade from anonymous code. I also take issue with where they decided to add in new CGs in Reboot. A lot of the new CGs are in places that are wholly inconsequential, like a close-up of one of the girls looking cute, and yet they remove CGs that have genuine narrative importance, both within the span of just Steins Gate itself, and also when considering ties to the wider series. Notably, Reboot does not include a CG for the visual rebuilding patent, for which Steins Gate's mechanics are based off of. And the final CG from the Luca route just isn't there, despite no longer having animation as a constraint, the way Elite did. Speaking of Elite, let's get into my second set of grievances with Reboot, the cut and changed content. As I mentioned earlier, Reboot uses Elite script as a base, and Elite cut over a third of the original game's content. What little Reboot adds does not outweigh the massive amount of material that it cuts by virtue of being based off of Elite. Aside from the aforementioned few small additions, what Reboot adds back in is mostly just lines of visual description, the cuts that weren't even that consequential in the first place. You lose a lot of exposition, world building, explanations of the game's mechanics, Okabe's internal narration, significant chunks of entire chapters of the game, almost all content involving an entire character with importance to the wider series, and a lot of the game's connective tissue. Then in terms of changed content, material that had been changed in Elite to match up with the anime footage remains changed in Reboot 2. This includes a major part of Chapter 9, one of my personal favorite chapters from the original game. I can't talk about it too much for spoiler reasons, but they changed the location of the most pivotal scene of the chapter to match up with that of the anime and Elite, when they really shouldn't have needed to and could have just gone with what the original game did, which in my view was significantly more impactful. In the end, you're left having gone through that scene feeling significantly less than you do in the original. Both the cut and changed content at the end of it all left me feeling pretty dissatisfied. Speaking of which, Reboot was advertised as a remake supposed to connect more with future science adventure titles. And in some ways, it does. Like with how the visuals very clearly tie the game more to anonymous code, a small addition in Chapter 5, and the post-credit scene. But in every other sense, Reboot doesn't connect with future titles in any substantive way that's clear or interesting in any meaningful capacity. In fact, like Elite, Reboot actively cuts many ties and references to Chaos at Noah, and also retains all the cuts related to Shido, who is decently important for the wider series. The end result of these cuts is a reduced sense of cohesion with the rest of the series. So in some ways, it connects more with the rest of the series, but in other ways, it connects even less. It's paradoxical. They really could have done a lot more to connect even with the already existing Side EV titles. But they didn't. Anyhow, let's move on to my third major grievance with Reboot: the new content. I found that the majority of the new content of the game was just massively underwhelming and disappointing. In total, Reboot has roughly 20.7k lines that it inherits from Elite, 2,500 lines restored from the original, and then 1.3k lines of new material. Where does this new material come into play? In the main story, there is a new fan service scene for fans of Steins Gate Zero in the middle of Chapter 5. It's funny, but only 173 lines long, and it just ends up feeling so insignificant. Steins Gate Reboot puts the majority of its new content in the side routes, the part of the game that I already didn't like very much to begin with. Aside from the all-new Moika route, they're mostly very small additions that serve to make the heroines' romances with Okabe slightly more compelling. But these additions are less than 50 lines per route. Like the additional scene in Chapter 5, these new bits are so small and inconsequential, you can't help but feel disappointed. Even Moika's route, Reboot's biggest addition, honestly felt very disappointing. It's cool that it's mostly new content, it's nice that it's twice the length of the other routes, and the scene to branch onto it is genuinely amazing. But the actual route itself just fell absolutely flat for me. It starts off so well, only to just end up feeling very meh. The most I can really praise it for is taking Okabe's character in an interesting direction. It really could have been much more than it ended up being, though. And at the end of the day, the way I feel about it is the same way I feel about the rest of Steins Gate's heroine routes. it doesn't really contribute very much of substance to the game. What is very significant is the post-credits scene, but I don't think a minute and a half of new content warrants playing through over 20 hours of the same exact game we've already had twice over. My fourth big issue comes down to the English release quality, and I don't mean the text translation. Steiner and Blick did a great job on the text, and you can check out the localization section of our review on KKP if you want something more in-depth about that. I mean the actual English release itself. It is so sloppy, and it feels like they just did not care because Steins Gate fans would buy whatever they put out regardless of how much effort they put into it. If a line has 4 or more rows of text displaying, the entire line compresses and looks very off-putting. It's not the biggest of deals, but it really does take you out of the experience at times. If you were a PC player waiting for a potential Committee of Zero patch, the issues with the English release would not matter, as you could just patch the game and all will be fine. But for those playing the game in English on Steam on release, or on console, these are genuinely massive issues. Reboot heavily emphasizes and uses text on images for explanations, but unlike the previous 2 versions of the game, none of those moments are translated at all. Even in Chaos Head Noah's notoriously bad official localization, they still at least edited English text on top of the Japanese. In Reboot, they didn't do anything at all. I could see people dropping the game entirely as soon as Kurisu's time travel explanation begins, because it's just so unengaging when you don't have anything on screen but Japanese text you don't understand the meaning of. It's so jarring coming off the heels of Anonymous Code's localization, when they went all in with a full English dub and extensively translated and edited heaps and tons of in-game images, only to just not try at all with Reboot's localization. They put so much care and attention into Anonymous Code's English release, and just did not care about Steins Gate reboots. Perhaps their rationale was that Steins Gate will sell irrespective of how much you put into it, so you might as well cheap out wherever you can. Like Anonymous Code, they're charging full AAA pricing for Steins Gate Reboot. In fact, it's even more expensive than Anonymous Code was in a number of different markets. But there isn't any English dub to justify the high price point, and frankly speaking, there isn't enough new content to justify paying that much for it either. Ultimately, who could I really recommend the game to? Only very specific crowds of people, to be honest. If you love Steins Gate to the end of the world and back and will buy literally any and all things related to Steins Gate, regardless of quality, then sure, go ahead and financially support mages. They probably need the money desperately anyways. If you are a console player and your choice is between Elite and Reboot and you already like visual novels, you're probably better off going with Reboot simply due to it just having more content. If you have never played visual novels before and really need animated visuals to keep your attention, go with Elite. But if you want the most complete experience, and you specifically want to go through Steins Gate more so as the second mainline Saïdivi entry, go with the original Steins Gate. For those of you who have already gone through Steins Gate's story in some form before though, I honestly don't think this game is worth your time and money. Maybe if you get it at a huge discount, it could be a nice way to revisit the story. But you already have so many other ways of doing so. At full price, for the same game with less content, I just cannot recommend it to most people. They had the opportunity to make Reboot a balls-to-the-walls meta-sequel to Anonymous Code with a completely new plot. They had the chance to make a substantially revised remake, incorporating a lot more side material into the game. They had the chance to add in so much new content, or even change aspects of the original that didn't age well. They could have genuinely made it into the definitive version of Steins Gate. But all we're left with, in the end, is a very unambitious cash grab of a remake, which will probably sell very well anyways, knowing Steins Gate fans. We have 3 separate versions of the Steins Gate visual novel now. But with how many people swear upon their souls that Steins Gate is a masterpiece and that they wish they could go through it for the first time all over again, maybe 8 to 10 years from now, we'll again have yet another remake of Steins Gate. The aggregate rating we at Kirikiri Basara gave was an 8 out of 10, with the others generally feeling more positive about Reboot than myself. but for me alone, I would give it a 6.5 or 7 out of 10, a score comparable to what I'd give Elite, and quite a bit below the 8 out of 10 that I would give the original. Reboot still has most of the strengths of the main story of Steins Gate. In its favor, it has significantly better pacing than the original. A lot of the new visuals look pretty good, and some of the new features are super cool. But by and large, there's still significant hiccups with presentation and tone, a sloppy official release, a massive amount of cut content, an unnecessary amount of changed content, and mostly disappointing and irrelevant new material. From a content standpoint, it is better and more complete than Elite, but even with Reboot's few narrative additions, I firmly believe the original is far and away the best version of the game. For those of you who end up playing Reboot, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the game. Let me know what you think of it. Thank you again to Spike Chunsoft for providing us at Kirikiri Basara with a review copy. And with that in mind, I will see you all around. Bossman out.